Tony, we have a national arts and disability strategy, the Australia Council. Can you tell us a bit about that for people who aren't in the room? What's the status of the National Arts and Disability Strategy?
Sure. Well, I should just clarify. It's part of, it was an initiative of the Cultural Ministers' Council, or now called the Meeting of Cultural Ministers, and all jurisdictions, all states and territories signed up to that policy some 3 or 4 years ago. Obviously, the Victorian government and all the governments around the country are part of that. The Australia Council is an observer at those meetings as an extension, as an agency of the Australian government. But we play obviously an important role on the working party in delivering some of those programs. It's a policy that obviously charts out some very important areas, and it's the responsibility of each government to respond to that through various programs and initiatives over time. It's currently being reviewed, and that's will be considered at the next meeting of the Cultural Ministry. Looking at best practice, what has happened, what hasn't happened, what was promised, what are the gap areas. So I think and I think that the numbers that have turned up tonight sort of indicate the high policy priority that this area has. Certainly my Minister Tony Burke, has said it's an absolute priority area for him as the Federal Minister. There's many examples that I could give, but I won't go into the detail of how the Australia Council has delivered some separate initiatives. But so anyway, that's the status of it.
And do you think that artists with a disability are competitive in an arts marketplace from your own personal point of view?
I think they are. You look at the success internationally and the awards that, say, Back to Back has won. Restless Dance Theatre. Absolutely competitive. We would like to, at the Australia Council, we would like to see more applications. As you know, we don't, or we try not to divide up our. We respond to the applications that we receive, and we'd like to see absolutely more. But I think we've got a job to do in terms of, well, what are those barriers to application? How do we promote our programs? How do we provide access to those artists to ensure that they are competitive? So we have a responsibility and a role to assist in that process.
And do you have, I know you've only been in the job 9 weeks, but, how does the Australia Council plan to move beyond tolerance? I mean, tolerance was a word in the National Cultural Policy that we're all very concerned about, which is, what has essentially sparked this forum. How does the Australia Council plan to tackle some of those barriers and move us beyond tolerance?
Well, we've got an incredible opportunity at the moment. From the 1st of July this year, the government, we're working under a new governance structure, a new act, which went, as a result of a review of us, of the organisation some 18 months ago. Along with that so we now have a skills-based board, 11 members, and I should acknowledge too that our chairman, Mr. Rupert Meyer, is here in the audience tonight, checking up to see whether I'm doing a good job after 9 weeks. But with that new governance structure, gives the board the flexibility to appoint the peers, the artists and the expert people in all policy areas to help us with our work, both our peer assessment and our policy advice. And I think we can increase the representation of artists with disability on our panels and through our peer assessment. Peer assessment remains central to the work of the Australia Council. The artist is obviously central to the work that we do and the work that we support. So I think over the coming years, as we move to a new structure, to a new Australia Council, I think we'll be able to see some significant change and improvement.
We probably should talk a little bit about kind of what those barriers are. And Ross, I know you have you have some pretty strong thoughts on what prevents deaf artists from having the types of careers that other artists enjoy. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I was planning to just lead into this in relation to the discussion around funding and linking to a question that I had, but could I just respond to the comments from Tony first? Okay, so with Australia Council being the peak body in Australia, I've worked with the Deaf Arts Network for 12 years, and I have found that the biggest barrier I experience is through funding applications. And the information that's text-based goes over the top of my head. It's all in English, convoluted language, the terms they use, the jargon I'm not familiar with, the arts lingo is really difficult for somebody like me to understand. So I require a sign language interpreter to actually read that document and interpret that into an Auslan version so I can understand what it requires of me. And then when I go to respond to the various criterion, the barrier that I face there is the application for funding in terms of trying to do that independently. I've tried that once. Said to my manager, look, I'm not going to ask for help this time, and I'm going to try and actually do it off my own back. Filled it out, sent off the form, felt very proud of myself, was all enthusiastic, and I was told that I was not successful, and it was quite demoralising. And that really wasn't an issue in terms of my literacy skills as such, but there wasn't enough information there to allow me to know what I needed to do to satisfy those requirements. And that was positive feedback, but where I could actually gain experience and have more practice at that, I don't know. Talking about the Arts Council, I was thinking about the model they have in the UK. They have a British Sign Language program. So BSL is the sign language that is native to the UK. And their council website actually has British Sign Language versions of their website about their funded programs and how you can actually apply. And all the various categories for funding requirements are signed and interpreted on their website and explained in terms of the buckets of funding that are available in the various categories, and that's signed in British Sign Language for people such as myself. So deaf people in the UK can actually make an application for funding using their own native language, and rather than responding in a written form in a document, they can sign back their response, which would be filmed, and then that council would actually hire an interpreter to interpret the BSL presentation and then actually assess it that way. So the individual actually gives their application in through British Sign Language, and I thought, wow, this is a fantastic example. Those people in England are so fortunate. Here we don't have that. We don't have that availability, and they can actually express themselves in their own native language. So my question here today is, will we actually think about the possibility of having an Auslan version available on your website, and rather than hear a response and nothing happen? I mean, I've heard that years ago, and we're here in 2013 and we still have nothing like it. And if I could just add to that, Arts Victoria have been amazing because they've been willing to employ a deaf person like me as an arts consultant, working along with somebody like Jodie in that capacity to work alongside somebody to be provided with information about the Arts Victoria funding programs and look at the various categories and explain to me what's required and how I can actually match those requirements and those criterion. So Jodie and I have been able to work together and translate that for a deaf person. And for me to actually sign that onto video in Auslan to explain the funded programs in depth and then have that clearly articulated, and then for Arts Victoria to have that available on the website. So in 2009, we finally, for the first time, had an Auslan version, and it had Auslan information on the Arts Victoria website. So it is possible, and you know, deaf artists were excited. They could see the information in their own language, their native language, and they got it firsthand through Auslan. But unfortunately, they've stopped that. It was a one-off. It only occurred for 1 year, and there's been nothing since. So, you know, why start something off and then it's, you know, not follow through? It ceases to exist. So that's my question I pose to you.
Tony, would you like to respond?
Sure. On day 3 in the job, I gathered together, we have an internal a group of staff called our Access Champions, and I met with them on my 3rd day because I acknowledged that I needed to learn a bit about the area and what the key issues were. And the issues you've just described are some of the things that have been identified, and we acknowledge that we're a bit behind the eight ball. We're currently auditing all our application processes, and it goes back to the barriers I mentioned in my previous answer. We respect all artists should have equal access to funding programs, to be supported in their application process, and we need to find the ways to enable that to occur. We are part of an international network of arts agencies, the Canada Council, the Arts Council of England, all around the world. And we have regular conversations and discussions about best practice. We learn from each other, and certainly in this area, I think we can learn from our colleagues in other parts of the world. I have trouble finding things on our website. So we've got a job to do, and I can assure you that it's over the period ahead we'll be addressing some of these issues.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Just a very brief one. I just wanted to add that I think that's fantastic. I really welcome what you've just said, Tony. I think that's great. And I would add to that, though, that my experience is that you can make all the policy changes and all the changes to your application forms in the world, and I really hope that you do, and I know that you will. But I think also added to that, there's no substitute for employment of staff with disability in your organisation from the top down. And I need to say that publicly. I know I've said it to you privately, and I know you're probably sick of hearing me talk about this, but I'm going to keep talking about it because, and it's not for any other reason than that I actually truly believe it, and I've seen evidence of it, both in arts and disability organisations and mainstream organisations in many areas, because what it actually will do over time, not tomorrow, will change the culture of your organisation. And look, I know there are some fantastic champions within the Australia Council at the moment who are working tirelessly on some of these issues. So it's not a criticism, but what I'm saying is that at board level, at senior executive level, all the way down to admin, there does need to be strong representation to make sure that the issue does not fall off the agenda, because it's great while you're here championing the issue, but it's got to keep going. It's got to be sustainable, and that's the way that you build sustainability, in my view.
Yeah, look, I'd obviously support and agree that. At an even higher level, I suppose, the Australia Council needs to represent diversity in everything it does, in the staff it employs at all layers of the organisation, and indeed the artists and arts organisations that it does support.
Indeed. I think Ross wanted to say something, and then I'm going to throw to Catherine.
Just two more points if I could add in relation to funding, please, Stella. With the Arts Council UK, they do have specific funds set aside for people with a disability. And I'm wondering if we're able to possibly establish something similar here, because we're artists with disabilities and we're competing with able-bodied people. And that's a difficulty within itself, because we are starting off on the back foot, and being compared to able-bodied people, I think we really should require specific funding for people with a disability to support us in that respect, or for deaf people. That's my first point. Secondly, recently I was very excited to be part of an art organisation where we were able to work together and collaborate, and that organisation applied for funding so that we could actually work in collaboration and we could include deaf artists in the work that they were doing. And this meant that the funding was limited to $20,000 that we could apply for, but we're able to actually sit down and look at the ins and outs, the outlays, the venue hire costs, the salaries of people, various expenses, and come up with a total of $20,000, which suited our needs perfectly. But unfortunately, there weren't additional funds available for interpreting services. So another $5,000 was required for interpreting services that wasn't available. And for me, it wasn't equitable, and there's always these additional costs. So we've applied for the funding, and we need to seek out further funding just to have access from day one. So if we could ask the funding body to consider an additional set of funds for the interpreting services, they're often reluctant to do so, and they need to seek co-funding. So it requires more work. But that's just all I wanted to say on that point.
Catherine, you and I hung out in London a little bit. We both went over for the Unlimited Festival, which was part of the Cultural Olympiad while the Paralympics was on. What do you think we have to learn from our international counterparts?
Oh, look, we're doing great stuff here. So I think nothing's perfect. When you put together arts and disability, you put together two quite insular mobs, you know. Artists talk to artists, disabled people talk to disabled people, and we're really good at that. Yeah. I love the assimilation analogy because I think sometimes the arts world is a bit like that. We are Borg, and we will assimilate you for all the geeks in the room. And assimilation means we'll take what's unique about you and make it part of us. Yeah. So that's not what we're after. And it's not what happens in the UK either. But the UK is not perfect. They've had the guts ripped out of them in order to put on a fabulous Olympics. They do have some basic access services that are way ahead of ours, definitely part of the whole scheme is that access is at the forefront. But we make work that's as good as theirs. So let's not forget that. And we make work that's unique to Australia. So let's not forget that. It's unique to our region because of who we are and the mix of people that we are. So in some ways it's like comparing apples and oranges in that we have some very different places that we're coming from, albeit that we're, you know, all colonialists, etc., apart from our First Peoples here. But I think we do run into a lot of problems with the access barriers, and I think it should be a given that those things should be funded. But that's the bottom line, you know. It's part of the United Nations Convention. You know, like it's Article 30, access to culture, as both artists and as audience. So it's a fundamental right, and we shouldn't stuff around about that. And if you give us that, then we can start having all these other arguments about assimilation and cultural uniqueness, and you know, we rely on what we call and okay, just 1 minute. I'm a privileged person. I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm educated, I'm articulate, I'm a lesbian, I'm autistic, and I'm a Crip. Now, you'll forgive the fact that I'm a lesbian and I'm autistic and I'm a Crip because I'm a white, middle class, educated woman. So I have privilege, and we have to think about all of the privilege that we have in this room and what we're going to do about that. Because we need to think about inclusivity as a goal, a societal goal, not just a goal that's unique to the arts. The arts, like has been said before, can lead cultural change. We need the arts to lead cultural change around people who are diverse, because if we don't have that, and the arts is political, let's not forget about that. The arts is political. It's not something nice we do on a Sunday. It's about our guts. So we need the arts to drive the cultural change around disability care, because it's not going to happen. People are going to have money in their pockets and nowhere to spend it, because society won't be ready. And the arts can play a part in making society ready for people who have been locked away for years. And so that's what I want to see is, and we have to do that in Australia. Yeah, there's nothing we can get from the UK except for that basic idea that everybody has a right to access the arts.